Hello, and welcome to the North Texas Teen Book Festival Virtual Author Panel Series. I'm Sarah Roberts, and I will be moderating this panel with our 5 amazing authors. And thank you for joining us for this Haunting Reads panel. Today, we are joined by authors Kalynn, Bayron, Zoraida, Cordova, Nina Lacour, Shelby, Mahurin, and Ellie, Marney. Starting with Kalynn, can you please briefly introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your book?
Yeah, I'm Kalynn Bayron. I wrote the book Cinderella is Dead that came out this past summer. Talking about myself is the most boring part. So I'm a full-time writer. I write YA, middle grade, and picture books. And Cinderella is Dead. The quick pitch is queer Black girls team up to overthrow the patriarchy in the former kingdom of Cinderella. So that's the elevator pitch.
We like it. We like it.
Yeah.
Zoraida, do you want to go ahead and go?
Sure. My name is Zoraida Cordova. I am the author of several books, most recently the Hollow Crown duology. The first book is Incendiary, and it is about a girl who is a memory thief. Her people's magic is outlawed in the kingdom of Puerto Leones. It's inspired by 15th century Spain. And after an attack on her rebel group, she goes back to the palace to infiltrate and try to bring down the king. So lots of teen girls kicking butt. And I'm also the co-editor of the anthology Vampires Never Get Old, which just came out from imprint Macmillan.
Nina, do you want to go ahead and go?
Sure. My name is Nina Lacour. I am the author of several YA books that are out and forthcoming picture books and an adult novel. And this is my new novel called Watch Over Me. It is a modern ghost story about a girl named Mila. She's 18 and she is just placed out of the foster system, and she accepts an internship on a remote Northern California farm. Her first night there, she sees ghosts on the field and has to figure out whether this place is safe for her and what the ghosts want. And at the same time, these old memories that she's tried to suppress over the years start rising up again.
And joining us from Australia, so a big thank you, Ellie Marney, if you would like to introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, hi, I'm Ellie Marney. I am coming from southeastern Australia, so I live about 2 hours outside of Melbourne, and I'm living in a rural area. I'm a YA writer, mainly of crime fiction. So I've written 9 books, and this is the new one. This is the very beautiful Australian edition of None Shall Sleep. The American cover, I think, has a very big bloody knife on the cover, like arr, arr, arr.
We like our bloody knives.
Yeah, gotta love a bloody knife. And None Shall Sleep is about 2 teenagers in 1982 who both have trauma in their past, and they're recruited by the FBI to interview juvenile serial killers. But then they got caught up in the hunt for a new killer, a new homicide case that the FBI is investigating, and they start getting insights into that case from one of their interviewees, who's a very highly manipulative, charming guy called Simon Goodmanson, who's a notorious juvenile sociopath. So and then hijinks ensue.
And Shelby.
Hey, hi guys. I am Shelby Mahurin. I am the author of Serpent and Dove. Hey, Jordan, will you give me a copy of Serpent and Dove? Sorry, my books are across the room. I have this great setup here. There's a chair with a stack of books and my laptop sitting on top. There, Serpent and Dove. It's right there. Here's one too. Serpent and Dove, and then the sequel, Blood and Honey, which is in my book stack here. I cannot show it to you. I'm so sorry. Oh wait, here we go.
Got it.
It just came out this past September, and it's a series set in a French-inspired medieval kingdom with a witch, Lou, and a witch hunter, Reed, who are forced into a relationship, and they fall in love. It's an enemies to lovers situation, and while that is happening, they are trying to sort of not defeat. There's an ancient war between their peoples that they are trying to navigate and maneuver in the process of this love story.
Okay. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. So we'll start off with some questions for each author, and then we'll move into some reader questions. And then if we have enough time, I've got a couple more questions for you. So let's start with Ellie. So the dedication in None Shall Sleep reads, "For all the scared, stubborn, angry girls." Can you talk about what that means to you and how that correlates to Emma and her anger and how she processes that?
Okay, so my main character, Emma Lewis, has survived being kidnapped by a serial offender. So she is a trauma survivor, and it was really important to me to be able to put a trauma survivor front and center in a book like this. Also, you know, in any kind of situation where you're writing YA crime, one of the key things that you need to figure out before you start the story is how to give your teenage characters, agency in what is usually a really adult situation, a really adult world of, you know, PIs and FBI and law enforcement. So yeah, I had this character who needed to have a certain amount of authority. And, you know, you only either get that by being a law enforcement adjacent, or by having studied it for a really long time, or by having experienced it. So I wanted to put this character on the page who'd had these incredibly traumatic experiences. I wanted to show that you could survive trauma and overcome, and make it a positive, make something positive out of it, move forward with it, and do something constructive with it. And so Emma she's kind of, you know, my love song to characters like Ellen Ripley from Aliens or Clarice Starling from Silence of the Lambs. So, you know, I wanted this tough, gutsy woman, this young girl leading the narrative. And for the scared, stubborn, angry girls, I mean, I think that applies to all girls, really. You know, we're all in that position at some point in our lives, and to varying degrees. So yeah, so in a way, the dedication is to all girls.
Okay. Thank you. And so let's go to Nina. So your story is about ghosts, and they take a prominent role in Mila's story as well. So both physically and metaphorically. Can you talk a little bit about why ghosts are so important to the story and how they impact the characters?
Sure. This is my first novel where I haven't stayed firmly in the explainable world. All of my other books have been very just realistic novels, but I had been wanting to write about ghosts for a long time, and I had been searching for the right story. And my last novel, We Are Okay, for a little while, I thought maybe I could get a ghost in here, like maybe I could figure that out. But it didn't work that way. But it was still like, I remember some of the readers of that book said that it was like the most ghost story of a book without any actual ghosts in it, like that you could just like feel the presence, like a ghostly presence, even though there isn't a ghost. And so I just knew that my next book would be a true ghost story. And it was very challenging for me to figure out exactly how the ghosts would work. But I used the novel Turn of the Screw by Henry James as like initial inspiration for this book. And I really liked how the ghosts in that novella like function, like they show up, but they don't do very much. It's really about their impact, the impact that they have on the human characters and how they respond to these ghostly presences. And so that was kind of my guide in terms of how I was going to introduce these ghosts and show them. But the ghosts end up, as you said, like they're very much real in the book. And they also have a metaphorical significance. And there's the story goes back and forth between these memories that Mila has of her past, where there's also a ghost, but a ghost that is something that appears because of manipulation and a psychologically abusive relationship, whereas the ghosts in the present of the story, though frightening, are ultimately more of a well, I don't want to give away any spoilers, but they serve a much different purpose in Mila's life. So a lot of this has to do with trust, like trusting our own instincts and what we see and what we understand. And also if we can trust the people around us to have our best interests at heart.
Thank you. So Kalynn will be next. How is it taking this well-known, beloved fairy tale with a white character and making it into an empowering story, not only for Black girls, but like you said earlier, for queer Black girls?
Yeah, so I think that it's kind of about shifting the lens. I think that a story like Cinderella, you know, it's so visible. Even if you've never sat down to read the book, the many different versions of that story, or if you've never seen the Disney movie, you kind of know the story. It's pretty familiar, but it still feels inaccessible because we're still talking about a white princess who wants a Prince Charming, and you know, the happily ever after is about her and her prince. And so it's still, you know, I think sometimes we think of fairy tales as kind of like universal, and they're not. I think that fairy tale themes can be universal, but this particular story, it always kind of stood out to me for a couple reasons. One, because there are no Black people anywhere in sight, and the other thing is because it's really a story about villainous women. It really kind of hammers home the point of you know, being distrustful of other women, even women who are close to you. And so those themes kind of they stuck out to me. And so when I sat down to do this retelling, and I don't know if retelling is the right word. Danielle Clayton called it a remix. I think that's probably a better term, because the way that I approached this story was to say, okay, if I have this society that is very much like the original, well, not the original, but the Disney version, we have this very patriarchal, heteronormative society. Who is the most vulnerable in a situation like that? It's a queer Black girl, and that kind of mirrors our society today. I think the most vulnerable among us are you know, people that are in the LGBTQ community who have marginalized intersecting identities. And so I wanted to do this from the point of view of someone like me, a queer Black girl who knew who she was and knew what she wanted. And it's more about asking society to meet you where you are versus having to change. And so yeah, I think that my way in was a little different. It is 200 years after Cinderella is, you know, her story has taken place. And so I just, I think that old things can be made new again, especially when we kind of open up the story and allow access to people who maybe haven't had access to it before. Because I know I loved fairy tales as a kid. But I never saw myself in any of the fairy tales. And as I got a little bit older, I never saw any queer people in fairy tales. So I think that what I tried to do is just try to open it up a little bit, try to shift the lens just a little bit to make it more accessible to people like me and to readers who maybe wanted to see those familiar guideposts that are in Cinderella, but not the same old story.
Thank you. So for Shelby, in Serpent and Dove, battle lines are clearly drawn in black and white, and anybody who really sees anything differently is seen as the enemy, no matter which side they're kind of on. Can you talk about writing a world with these clearly defined lines and how having characters see things more in the gray area can help young readers navigate the current social landscape?
Yeah. When I was writing Serpent and Dove, I didn't necessarily set out to write a world that was so stark. That was something that I think I had internalized, and it came out in the story. Because the world is very polarized. It's a very religious world in that the tenets of that world are based on Catholicism. I grew up in the church, so everything is super black and white in the church, and I could never sort of wrap my head around it. It's still something that I struggle to see, because if you look around, nobody is black and white. Everyone is morally gray. And so in writing Serpent and Dove, I wanted to explore, what does good look like? What does evil look like? Is it a spectrum? Like, because people say it all the time that villains are the heroes of their own story, right? They're doing the things that they think need to be done to better the world, or better the world for themselves, or, so that was important to me in sort of writing this book. It was very cathartic just to sit and examine, like, nothing is black and white. There are two sides to every story. There are 3 sides, 4 sides, 5 sides to every story. And our world can be very polarizing, the world that we live in now, right? So I think that empathy is very important in trying to navigate that world. And that's what I explore in Serpent and Dove with these characters, is just think about it from the other side. Think about, their pain, what they're going through, yeah. So I'll just end it there. Yes, just empathy is an important theme. Yeah, all the things. It's super heavy. Sorry, guys.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for that answer. And so, Zoraida, so in the Brooklyn Brujas series, involves a lot of mythology and folklore. Can you talk about using Latinx culture in your world building, but still creating a unique new world, and how or what it's like to bring that world over 3 different books and telling 3 different stories within that world?
Yeah. So I love building magical systems. I think that's one of my favorite things as a fantasy writer. And speaking of, like, I grew up in a Catholic household. I'm from Ecuador, and so I grew up with the very specific traditional things. But in Latin America, we combine a lot of superstition within Catholicism, right? It's like there's almost no separating these things, right? My mom will pray to certain, like, gods that are not Catholic, and but still have, like, all of, like, the Virgin Mary reliquaries and saints and things like that. And so that went into the creation of the Brooklyn Brujas as they are. And so my Brujas, they embody the Latin American diaspora, because I don't think that I could write a book about Latinx witches without even mentioning the colonization of Latin America, slavery, which created Santeria in the Caribbean, and all of those things, all of the things that make us Latinos, and that gets erased from Latin American media, which is incredibly white, right? Latinos are we're a problem. But so back to, like, the world building, like, the culture of what does it mean to be Latino Latinx is really difficult to explain, because there are so many different countries that make up Latin America, so many indigenous languages that nobody tells you people still speak in Ecuador, right? Like 18 different versions of Quechua. And so how do I put that in this one family in Brooklyn that is 3 generations removed from wherever their people came from? And that was really difficult. So I could only tell the story as I grew up, right? The things that I learned, this sort of amalgamation of different beliefs, different regions of Ecuador, my dad's family from the mountain areas, my mom's family from the coast, and how all of those things influenced the superstitions that I grew up with, how I changed a little bit of those things and created the superstitions that my Brujas believe in. I created a god system based on the Greek mythology structure, right? The maternal gods and all of their messed up children. But I use Spanish as the magical language to name these gods and these figures. And so that's, I do get people who are like, thank you for teaching me about Latino mythology. And I'm like, there's no Latino mythology. I made it up. I'm sorry. You know, there are regions, there's Mayan mythology, there's Aztec mythology, there's, you know, individual things, but there's no like one Latino mythology. And so I do appreciate, like, maybe I just did such a good job that like people believe this is real. And if somebody wants to create a Zoraida cult, a Brooklyn Brujas cult, I will, you know, I'll be your queen. But other than that, it's this is the only way I know how to create a system, right, from the ground up, from the individual, and then figuring out what that individual needs in the journey of their story. And that's how I sort of, as I go, create the magic, the culture, what actually needs to be in here for my character to complete their hero's journey.
Thank you. Thank you so much for all your individual answers. I'm going to go more into just asking a big group question, so chime in whenever you want to. So what characters were the hardest to write and who was the easiest?
To pick on
you
us.
Free for all?
Yep, just go.
Free for all?
Okay.
We just
There you go, Ellie. I volunteer you, Ellie.
You gotta love those easy characters. Because you know, when you're writing a book, it's like oh, it's all incredibly hard, and then, you know, you kind of take refuge in this really easy character. I mean, usually your protagonist ends up being the easiest character because, you know, you're living with them all the time. And yeah, Emma was my easiest character and the person I was most able to relate to. And then I had to deal with this guy, Simon Goodmanson, who is this genius sociopath. And people were like, oh, you know, how did you get into the role for that character? You know, who did you kill? Basically, I think is what they were asking me. But I mean, above and beyond that, it was really hard. It's really hard to write people who are really incredibly smart. Like, I'm not smart. I'm just a normal person. And I end up writing this character who's in like the 98th percentile for intelligence, for IQ and all this sort of stuff. So writing someone who's 10 steps ahead of every other character in the room is really, really, really hard when you're not a genius. Also, it's really hard to write characters like that and still make them sound like they're 19, because, you know, he's only 19. I didn't want him to sound like he was 45. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I had to keep going back to the fact that this is a guy who is incredibly bright, like, you know, off the charts clever, and incredibly charming and manipulative. And he's had all of the benefits of, you know, a really privileged upbringing. And he's used to using people and getting what he wants. And he has no real emotional connection with people. He's, you know, that's not his psychological makeup at all. All he thinks about is, he just considers people to be prey, basically. And then I had to find points there where I could make him, you know, relate to the other characters as a young person as well. So, you know, there's a lot that he knows, but, you know, he doesn't really know people. He doesn't really understand how people work. He doesn't really understand relationships or how to connect with this young woman who's interviewing him, who he finds interesting, but, you know, he repels her. And, you know, he tries to kind of, you know, ingratiate himself with her, and she keeps rebuffing him and he can't figure out why. So he's also got a lot of book learning, but not a lot of street smarts, you know? So yeah, that was, I spent literally weeks trying to figure out the dialogue for the interactions between Emma and Simon. And I mean, I hope it paid off. But yeah, I mean, I love writing the hard characters, but yeah, they do take an awful lot of work.
Yeah, I think for me, my main characters are always the most difficult because it's their story, and I'm over here just trying not to mess it up. And also, it's difficult having the mindset of somebody who has like an emotional bruise, right? It's enough to deal with your own emotional bruises. My buddy Danielle Clayton, who is my co-host on the podcast, the writing podcast Deadline City, you know, she calls it the emotional bruise. Like, what does your character hurt? Like, what's making them, you know? And so if you have to spend the entire novel thinking about that, it's sort of draining. Whereas like your side characters, they get to be fun. They get to be just along for the ride. And they have their own narrative and wants and, you know, emotional things too, but it's not as all consuming.
I completely agree. Sorry, go ahead, Nina.
No, you go ahead, Shelby.
No, it's okay. You can go ahead.
We're so polite. I was going to say, for this one too, my main character was the most challenging, and it varies for me book to book, like how clearly I know my main character and how she's going to present herself. But in this one, like, she's this very difficult mixture of like vulnerable and guarded and trusting and mistrusting, and like it was challenging to get that right. And then also she's in this unfamiliar place, and she kind of understands what's happening and kind of doesn't, and it was tough. But the character who brought me the most joy when writing is the character of Lee, who's a 9-year-old boy. And one of the reasons I wanted to write a book like this one was I wanted to have a big cast of characters of various ages, because most of my young adult novels, you know, have been very focused on the teen experience and teen friendships and romance and all of that. And I was like, I want to write like, you know, prominent adult characters and prominent child characters. And so this 9-year-old boy, who is arguably like the second most important character in this book, was really a joy to write, and to get to do 9-year-old dialogue. And, you know, the relationship between an 18-year-old and a 9-year-old was something I hadn't explored before.
Yeah, I agree with Zoraida, just that the main characters can be really hard just because you're in the weeds with them as they're trying to figure it out. And the secondary characters do kind of add a levity, at least in my books. Because like you said, it's like they have their own wants and their needs, and they have emotional bruises, but you're not, at least in my books, we're not in their heads with them as they're experiencing it. So the secondary characters, especially in Blood and Honey, where my main characters are dealing with grief, really added a lightness to the plot that it needed. So they were kind of like my fun, how can I bring them into this scene to add some sort of levity to it? Like, can we get some laughs? Whereas my main characters are usually pretty hard to write.
For me, my main character, Sophia, she was, I don't like the word easy, but she was definitely the most accessible to me. And, you know, she's a 16-year-old girl who is, you know, kind of struggling with friends, with family relationships, kind of all those things that you're trying to figure out when you're 16, and just trying to figure out what she stands for and what she's going to do about it. But for me, there's a character, Erin, who she's kind of the opposite side of the coin from Sophia. They both grew up in the same place. But for Erin, this kingdom that they live in it's left its mark on everyone, but Erin is especially affected by it. And she has come to a point where she's kind of unwilling or unable, for lots of different reasons, to kind of make the leap and say, okay, let's try to change things. And so that causes a rift between her and Sophia, who wrongly, you know, because Sophia is a flawed, you know, person, as she's definitely not perfect, but she doesn't understand why Erin isn't ready to kind of risk it all. And Erin is trying to explain to her that she needs to stay safe. That's her biggest concern. So Erin was the hardest character for me to write, because it really, it really took getting into her mindset inside of her head and just trying to figure out, you know, how is a 16-year-old girl, you know, how can you deal with these things? She's being married off. She is a victim of domestic abuse. And so it was difficult. But I think it was important to put it on the page and have a conversation about it and kind of walk through it. So yeah.
Thank you for that. So the next question is, you all have books coming out this year, but this is also a year that we can't travel or make the connections that you normally make in a time of when you would be promoting a book, going on tour, doing all these fun things. So how has it been trying to stay connected with those readers when you can't really have that face-to-face contact that I know is so important to so many authors and readers as well? So how has that been for you?
I mean, the quarantine was very difficult in the beginning. You know, this was a year where I put out 3 novels because I'm crazy. And, you know, I'd been working on them for a very long time. And so it sort of felt like anticlimactic when each one came out because I, you know, couldn't celebrate in the same way that I usually do, right? I live in New York and we have such a big author community here, but I did celebrate online. And I do think that these online events have sort of opened up our ability to connect with more people. So people who otherwise couldn't come to New York can now could access a launch party and interact that way. I think that I've maintained the same availability that I've always had on Twitter and on Instagram, but I did pull back from school visits and other things like that just because they doing the online things over and over again, it can be very draining, and as much as they are fun, and sort of I'm trying to refocus on writing again because it's so much harder to write during this time for me.
I found that the virtual events were surprisingly gratifying. Like, as long as there weren't too many of them, I totally agree. But you know, there's a lot of burnout. But
Oh yeah.
I was when my release week happened, I was kind of like really sad actually going into it, just feeling like, oh, this is when I would usually like be with my friends and family in a bookstore and, you know, all of the stuff and see readers. And but then like after the first event, it felt good to like talk to a friend on a screen and then to see all the names in the chat and the participants list. And it was exciting to see people who live all over the country who wouldn't be able to come in person. And it felt like, oh, we're all together, you know, for a little while. And then afterwards to see, you know, tagged on social media, like where people were in their living rooms and their like cozy clothes, you know, with pictures of the computer and them watching, it is really nice. It's like, it's a way to remember that we are all connected, you know, when we put ourselves out there in that way, because I think this time has felt so isolating for so many of us. And to connect even in that sort of way is better than nothing. But I certainly am looking forward to the day when we can all be at a book festival together like this one and be sitting next to each other on a panel. And there's a way where like it fills you up in a different way, right? Like when you're actually interacting and rather than just like when this is over, we press end and go back to whatever it was we were doing before.
Anybody else? Okay.
I don't want to go first.
Well, a lot of us talk about how the North Texas Teen Book Festival was like, we were on the edge of it. Like that was kind of almost the last time that we kind of saw everybody. So I know it's been difficult for you guys, but it's also kind of been difficult for the North Texas Teen Book Festival family as well. Did anybody else want to answer, or you ready to move on to the next one?
I was just going to say I was supposed to be in America when my book came out. So, and then Australia shut its borders. And then when None Shall Sleep was released, the state that I'm in was going was right in the middle of like one of the most intense lockdowns in the world. So people couldn't like leave their homes for more than an hour a day. And you couldn't go further than 5 kilometers from, like 2.5 miles from your house, and you couldn't meet anybody. And the whole state is masked up, and it was really, really intense. So it was very weird. Just I bought a very small bottle of champagne and just kind of opened it, and it was kind of like, oh, is this it? I get this instead of New York and Texas, which was really sad. But like Zoraida said, it was the digital stuff has opened everything up. And also because I live in a country area and I'm a couple of hours away from any kind of urban centers anyway. So I think it's made it so much more accessible for people who live in regions, who live in rural areas. And, like I can talk to you now in my morning time and on the other side of the world. And yeah, it's just opened up a whole different world. So yeah, so thank you. Yeah.
Shelby, did you want to go or?
You guys have answered that so articulately. I also live in the country, Marney, Ellie, and like you, I've sort of loved doing the virtual things just because I've been able to partner with people that I never would have been able to do events with. Like a virtual tour, with people. I didn't have a launch for Serpent and Dove because I live in the middle of nowhere. I live in Indiana, and I don't live in like urban Indiana. I live in rural Indiana with like cornfield, and my local indie is an hour and a half away from where I live. So I didn't really get to do any events. So that wasn't much different with Blood and Honey in the middle of the pandemic. But Blood and Honey's just whole launch was a lot better just because the virtual thing was becoming the norm, and it was so accessible to people like me who live in the middle of nowhere and don't have the opportunity to go to like bookstore events. Yeah. I will say though, I don't know, do you guys find that when you're more accessible on social media, it's harder for you to get in the zone to write? Is it? Yes, because I have been trying to be more accessible on social media, like during the pandemic, because it's the only real way to connect with your readers and with other writers. And it has been so draining, like to try to just like get my creative juices flowing again. And I can't really understand why, but
it's the emotional roller coaster, I think, right? Like 1 minute it's like my entire timeline is yay books, the election, publishing is dying, book sales are up, book sales are down. Like it's just not great. And Kalynn, you're a debut, so I feel like at least like I feel like you got people took you under their wing, right? Like
I'm thankful for that for sure. But yeah, debuting in the middle of this, Cinderella came out July 7th. So my launch was in my dining room with my kids and a bottle of champagne, and I got to talk to some great authors that night for a virtual event. But then I have a book out next year, and the way things are going, maybe it'll be 2 books in a pandemic. Like I'm an optimistic type of person. I'm always trying to look for the silver lining. So these virtual events, that's kind of my silver lining. Like I'm like, okay, I get to at least talk to people. I get to talk to readers. I get to talk to other authors. I am trying so hard to keep it positive, but it's rough. Like it is really rough. So, we're just going to roll with it, because what else can you do?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's go ahead and make sure we have time for some reader submitted questions. So Farah and Bonnie kind of asked the same question. The first part was kind of the same, and then we can break off into the different parts. So have any of the authors had what they felt was ghost or haunting experience? Let's get to the haunting reads of this panel.
Yeah, I can talk about an experience that I had.
Like, no.
I had this experience like many years ago, maybe 10 or even more years ago. Yeah, I think even further back. But my parents were searching for a house. I lived in an apartment growing up, and so they were buying their first house ever. And I was really excited for them, and I love houses and house hunting. And so I went along to a bunch of the open houses. And in one of them, it was like, broad daylight in Oakland, California. We had seen like several other houses that day, and we walked through the door of this like adorable little craftsman house. And as soon as I walked in, like everyone was like, "Oh, this is so sweet." And it was, but I just like felt bad. Like it just made me feel like something was off. And we kept exploring the house, and I was really just trying to like keep how I felt to myself, because this was really weird. Like it was a sweet house. Like they might want to buy this house, and why would I be like, this house weirds me out? But we kept going through, and then it was time to go upstairs. And so like the realtor leads us upstairs, and like with each step, I felt this mounting dread. And then we got in the upstairs, and my parents are admiring it, and the realtor is showing all the features. And I walk into this bedroom, and I just feel it really, really strongly. And then I opened up the door to the closet and just felt this overwhelming, just like horror wash over me. And there was nothing in there that would have made me feel that way, but it was just this intense feeling. And I had to leave and go sit outside. And again, I was trying to not influence anybody. And I just like went outside, and I was sitting on the front steps, and the realtor came down, and she said, what's going on? What are you feeling? And I just explained it to her. And she said, that happened to me one time. And she was like, once in my entire career of real estate in the Bay Area, she had that same feeling in the condo that she was showing a client, and also tried to tamp it down. And there's nothing I can explain, but like there was certainly a spirit or something in that house that was like telling me, and only me, that it was wrong. Yes, and to get out.
I have one. So I went back to Ecuador to visit 2 years ago, and I'm sort of estranged from my dad's family, but we're getting a little bit closer now that I'm older and not an angry teenager. And so we went I wanted to go visit my grandmother, whom I'm named after, at the cemetery. And so we all go in a group. And in Ecuador, all of the cemetery is above ground. So they're like boxes. I don't know how to, not
maybe like Louisiana.
Kind of, yeah.
New Orleans,
yeah. I don't know the exact term for it. I knew it because I needed to for a book, and it's a long word. Anyway, so we're walking through these halls, and it's very dark, and it's humid. It's so humid. There's like no breeze. We're in the trop, like it's Ecuador. We're at the coast of the equator in South America, and we're walking toward my grandmother's grave, essentially. And I just get this overwhelming sensation to start crying. Like I just start crying out of nowhere. We were like joking about something, and then I just start bawling. And I feel a hand caress my face like a breeze. And I'm like, there's no breeze because it's humid and like the weather, like there's no breeze in the air. And I just like wept because I like some, it might not have been it could have been like a stranger ghost, like just trying to creep on me. But I like to think that it was my grandmother.
So beautiful.
I love that. I don't have any like haunting, scary stories, but I have a similar sort of experience, Zoraida. My grandmother passed away 4 years ago now, and my grandpa and her had a song. It was Blue Velvet. I don't know if anybody's heard Blue Velvet. And I was in the car with my grandpa, and we were going to the flower shop to pick out flowers for her funeral, and he was talking about grandma, and as soon as he turned the car off, and the radio runs for a little bit, after you turn the car off, and the song Blue Velvet came out as we like went to go into the flower shop to pick out her funeral flowers, and it was just the saddest thing. But I also think that like my grandma was there telling him it was okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have First of all, I don't play with demons. It's not a game. I know it's real.
I've been watching your reaction through all of this. So I'm like, she is not here for this.
From Birmingham, Alabama, and my dad's family is from North Carolina. These people do not play when it comes to, and it's real. Like, it's not because they don't believe it or it's not. It's real. And I've seen some things, and I'm a horror fan too, but it like that combination of things is just crazy. But yeah, I have, so like my dad passed away in 2013. And this was probably like 3 or 4 years ago. I had this really vivid dream about him, and it was so real. And I got up in the middle of the night and I was like, man, let me call my brother, because this is like great. As I have my phone in my hand, my brother calls me. It's the same exact time. And he lives in Arizona. And I was like, what's wrong? And he was like, I just had this dream. And I was like, okay, let me tell me the dream. And he told me it's the exact same dream. It's the exact same time. So there's that. But there's also like my partner, he's from Tampa, Florida, and he grew up there, and he swears up and down that there was a little boy, the spirit of a little boy that lived in his house that used to hide his shoes. And and I was like, oh, that's nice. And then we go to visit his parents, and he wants me to sleep in the same room where the ghost was hiding the shoes. I was like, I don't know who you think I am, but I will not be staying in that room. But he believes it, and he's seen it, and his parents have seen him, and I'm just like, I don't even know. But yeah, I had lots of paranormal things going on. Yeah.
So you said that you like horror movies. Can you watch like the demon horror movies or no?
I do. And that's why I do it to myself. I psych myself out. So it's like, some combination of actual things happening. And then I also just watched like The Conjuring. So now I'm like, okay, is this my dad, or is this a whole demon that's in my house? Like, I don't know what's going on here. So yeah, it's just like, yeah, it's a mess. I'm a mess. Yeah.
I cannot watch any of those horror movies at all. I write about serial killers and autopsies and forensic investigation and all of the horrible things that people can do. But the idea of supernatural stuff just completely freaks me out. Mm-hmm. So, and I seem to have this thing about, do you know the movie, The Amityville Horror? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So I think that was one of the first horror movies that I watched. And I remember watching it at my grandmother's house when I was probably way too young. In fact, I don't even remember how old I was. That gives you an idea of how young I probably was. But every time I watch that movie, something bad happens. It's like my curse movie. So like, and I remember watching, one of my kids wanted to watch it. It was the reboot, I think, with Ryan Reynolds, who was in it. I don't know. It was released a few years ago. And I was, heavily pregnant with my youngest child at that stage. And I was like, okay, I'll just sit here. I can't get up off the couch anyway. So I'm just going to sit here and watch this movie. And then my kid went to bed. And then, so I was stuck there watching the rest of the movie to the end, because I couldn't get to the remote. And then at the end of the movie, there's like this massive jump scare. And so I'm just sort of sitting there kind of paralyzed. And then as soon as the jump scare happens, all the lights in the house go out, like immediately. It's 2:00 in the morning.
We're all like, no.
I'm sitting on the couch. And our house is run on solar power. So the only way to switch the lights back on are to go outside the house and then go downstairs to the crawl space under the house. And I was just like,
let me go.
Just like call out to somebody else to go do that, because yeah, there's just no way. So every time I watch this movie, something bad happens, something terrible. So yeah, I'm trying to avoid it as much as possible.
And Ellie, it must be much worse for you because you're kind of like in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
In Australia.
Yeah, we're like literally like, people from overseas are always making jokes about kangaroos jumping down city streets in Australia. And I think that did happen during lockdown in Adelaide, in another city. But I actually live in an area where there's kangaroos everywhere. So I was kind of slowing down to, make sure I didn't hit any with my car on the way. to the place here where I'm broadcasting from. So yeah, there's wildlife everywhere. I'm fully in the bush.
Zoraida's like, tell me more about the kangaroos.
And the quokkas.
Over.
Yeah, come and see them. All of you, come and see them. They're really good.
Okay, it's kind of the second part to that question from both of them was, have any of these experiences made it into your books?
Just that sense of anxiety, you know, that you kind of feel when you're upset. I mean, like, I'm not writing about supernatural things. I'm writing about evil people, but that sense of tension that I'm one of these people who has this kind of, you know, when kids are born, they have like a Moro reflex, which is when they get startled and they throw their hands up in the air. Yeah. And I think apparently some people kind of retain that, like, and never really lose that. And I think I'm one of those people that gets kind of easily startled. And so I feel like, you know, it's kind of like a low grade anxiety that you kind of live with all the time. But that's something that I'm always trying to put into my books, that feeling of kind of rising tension. And still by the end, you're just kind of a big bundle of nerves. So yeah, it's my gift to everyone.
Maybe that's why I like peekaboo. Like, if you play too much peekaboo with children, you're just giving them a lifetime anxiety. I think that I was gonna say no, but I have an adult novel coming out next year. It's gonna be my debut adult novel. It hasn't announced yet, but it is like a magical realism story about an Ecuadorian family and sort of like retracing their journey, like where their grandmother got their magic from. And there's like a sexy circus. It's like this whole thing. But circus, yeah, sexy circus.
Sexy circus, okay.
And so I included a lot of that sort of the sort of magical feeling that I experienced. I didn't want to romanticize going back to Ecuador, but definitely some of the things that we encountered made it into the book.
Yeah, I have this kind of like recurring theme of like magic feeling like grandmothers. That's a thing that kind of you know, shows up in my work over and over again. And I think that a lot of times it's not even like it's not a secret. It's just kind of like, you know, well, you know, grandma does this. Grandma can, you know, can read the cards. Grandma can, you know, make potions, which is, you know, can use herbs and candles and all this kind of stuff. It's just kind of a part of who these grandmother characters are. So that's kind of a theme that shows up over and over for me.
Anyone else?
I do have a character in Watch Over Me that came from real life. The character of Lorna, who is the ghost from the past, this old woman who's holding a plastic daisy in one hand and the gnarled roots of a tree in another hand, and standing on the side of the road and looking kind of vacantly across the street. And that is from real life, a real woman who I drove by and saw that way. So I am always putting these, you know, these events from real life into books and making them into something else.
I haven't really had lots of haunting experiences in my life, thank God, because I'm terrified of all of it. I can't watch horror movies. I'm like, no, like, stay away.
I'm a chicken.
I am a chicken. So like possession is one of these things. Like, I asked you about the demon horror movies, if you can watch them. I cannot, because it terrifies me. And I actually, in the third book of the Serpent and Dove series, I do deal with like possession in it. And so that's been terrifying, but that's the only thing that I've really incorporated in my books that genuinely frightens me.
I would say I am a huge no horror. Like, even when they asked me to do this panel, they were like, do you want to do a panel called Haunting Reads? And I was like, no, I do not. But then they gave me the books. I was like, okay, I can handle those. But I will say that I watched Penny Dreadful, and I could handle that.
Yes.
There's only one jump scare. It's in the first episode, within the first 10 minutes. There are some scenes with toads that made me extremely uncomfortable. But other than that, I could handle all of it. So if you're looking for a recommendation to watch at this time of year, Penny Dreadful is very good.
I haven't watched that yet, so it's on my
So
list for
good.
sure.
So good.
Okay, cool.
Is that like a recent horror movie, Penny Dreadful? Sorry.
No,
TV
it's a
show.
series. It's a series. It's a TV show. So it's three.
Okay.
There's the one that's three series, and it's set in England, and you've got Frankenstein.
Josh Hartnett.
Yes. You've got Frankenstein in it, his story, and Frankenstein's wife, and you've got I was trying to remember who else was in it. Oh, the Wolfman is in it. So
Eva Green.
Really
She's
interesting.
amazing.
Monster.
She was amazing.
Okay.
Amazing. So yeah, but then they also recently came out with another like spin-off that is set in Los Angeles in, I think, the 40s. That one looks really interesting. I haven't watched that one yet. But if you're looking for something scary and haunting, Penny Dreadful if you don't do scary, like me. Okay, so next submitted question was Danny asked, what is everyone's favorite cryptid or urban legend?
Okay, this is a deep dive. I really love cryptozoology. I think I want to go with mermaids though, because it was my very first trilogy, which is now discontinued. It's out of print, but it's always going to be my baby. And it going into like the fake biology of any kind of supernatural creature is just a really like fun, nerdy thing to do. And so mermaids have always been that creature for me. And you know, there are different schools of cryptozoology when it comes to mermaid anatomy. So
I will jump in real quick just because my mom grew up in Philadelphia, and like for some reason, so my thing is it's the Jersey Devil. And the reason, she swears that she was at camp, which is like a sleepaway camp, you know, outdoor school type thing when you're, I don't know, like 6th grade, 7th grade, something like that. She says that her friends or whatever in her cabin, they heard a noise. And when they came out in the morning, there was like scratch marks on the side of the cabin. And I was like, I don't know about that. But they swore it was like the Jersey Devil, and there was like a news article about it or something. So I've been kind of obsessed with that since I was a kid, since she first told me about that. So I think that that's just fascinating.
Yeah. Didn't they name like a sports team after their Jersey Devil?
I think so.
Yeah. Also, the Loch Ness Monster.
Yes.
There's a story that a friend told me in like that classic urban legend way, where it was like, you know, his roommate's girl, like his roommate's ex-girlfriend is who it happened to, you know, like, and it's a story of this girl who wants to just kind of get out of the city for a while. And so she goes camping, and she has, just like her camping gear, and it's just her, and she has a camera, and every day she's all, you know, out in the mountains, totally remote, and taking photographs of her scenery, and has this nice uneventful trip, and comes back home and gets her film developed. And when she's looking through her photos, she sees, you know, like the beautiful horizon photo that she took, and then the next photo is a picture of her sleeping. And then she sees the, you know, lake and that she took. And then the next one is where she was sleeping that night. And it goes on and on and on. And then, you know, she loses her mind and ends up never returning to school. And that's the end. But I thought, when I heard that story, I thought it was like the greatest thing. And I thought it actually happened to someone. And then someone told me it was an urban legend. So I'm very gullible.
So we have kind of a local urban legend where I live. There's a round barn that it's this like old dilapidated round barn. And the legend here goes that there was a woman who had an affair, and her like the other person, they killed her husband, and they took him out to this round barn because there were pigs out there. And I don't know if you guys know this, pigs eat human flesh.
People.
Yeah, people. So they like took him out there to dispose of the body. Obviously it didn't work in this urban legend because they were caught, but like I don't know if it's real. I'm like I don't have any desire to know if it was real, but every time I drive by that barn, I'm like, it's definitely haunted for sure. It's haunted.
Yeah.
I'm gonna kick off from Shelby's story because when I was researching a story that I wrote, this is way back before I had anything published. I wrote a short story about a woman who is in a domestic violence situation, and she gets in a fight with her husband, and then she kills him, and then then she panics. How's she going to get rid of the body? Because she's got 2 young children, and then she's a soap and candle maker, so she has all the equipment to render the body down. And so I had to do a lot of research online about how you make tallow candles from fat. Which sounds disgusting. And Shelby, yes, you do use pig fat quite a lot. I mean, it was originally used pig fat quite a lot. And then, it's that whole, you get red flagged on some government database for researching all of this super weird stuff that no one would. It's like, well, how much fat would be in the average human body and how much would be left over when you rendered it down? And it was just like, I don't want to know this stuff. There were a lot of websites with people who seemed to have stories about how they knew in alarming detail how much you need for all this stuff. I was like, I don't really want to dig too much into that. But Kalynn, we have like a local panther around here. There are no panthers in Australia. I should point that out straight away. But there's a lot of stories about like a panther who lives in the mountain ranges, like near where we're located. And people keep saying, "Oh yeah, I saw the panther." And you hear it around town all the time. And it's like, oh, we were up camping up in the hills, and we were there all weekend, and we woke up and we found these paw prints in the dirt, and everyone's kind of like, oh yeah, it's the local panther. So yeah,
that's so weird. I have that where I live too. I live in Indiana, and people say that they saw a panther. It's like, you did not see a panther. Stop it.
But there's a devil or a panther or something in every location in the world, or so something odd. Maybe.
Okay, well, we've almost reached the end of our time, so I have one more question for everybody. So given everything that is going on right now, it is also, for those of us in the United States, an election year. So my question to you, without going to political parties or anything, or mentioning anything of that, which of your characters that you've written would be the most enthusiastic voter?
Every single one of them, because it is imperative that we all vote.
There you go.
Talk to your family, get your family members to vote. So much is at stake in this election. Every single one of my characters would be lining up and waiting all day long in those lines to vote, or mailing their ballots in if they, have trust in the system and know that their state will do a good job with that.
Yeah, I agree with you. I feel like the sisters of my Brooklyn Brujas, the sisters of my Brooklyn Brujas series would definitely, the youngest one would be like, this is our civic duty. We have to go and vote. And I feel like a lot of us who write stories about rebellion, like, of course, all of our characters would want to exercise this right, because they're fighting for so many things.
My main character would be very obnoxious. I feel like she'd be the one like knocking on doors, like, "Hey!"
I could totally see her like volunteering to text, and when she like gets a nasty text back, would just be like light into them.
Yeah, I think Sophia, my main character, would definitely be out there voting, and I think Constance would be right there at her side, and maybe like threatening people, like, if you don't vote, like, I'm totally gonna slice you up. So yeah, something like that.
Wholesome.
Yes.
I think the only character in my book who probably wouldn't vote would be Simon, but you know, he's a sociopath. So if that gives you an indication.
Don't be a sociopath.
Yeah, don't be a sociopath. Go out and vote.
Love it.
And yeah,
Have a slogan.
good luck to you all. I've been tracking the numbers. You've just got the most amazing number of people currently lining up to vote, and I'm so hopeful and excited for you. And I'm just, even here in Australia, we're watching what's happening, and you know, hoping really hard for all of you that there's a good outcome.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And on that note, I think we have been talking for quite a bit. Thank you so much to all of you for joining us this evening. And we hope to see you in person soon, one day soon, at the North Texas Teen Book Festival. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We hope you will join us for the next one. Thanks. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Okay, Jerry.
Bye.